specific question to Geoffery Robertson on this. It's from Ash Wickrasinga.
Mr. Robertson, you, like many in the new atheist movement, seem hell-bent on the idea that religion should not be privileged in such a way as to provide grounds for legal immunity. Regardless of whether the Pope has committed crimes against humanity, he is still entitled to head of state immunity under international law, being the head of state of the Vatican. In light of this, doesn't your argument therefore reveal itself to be nothing more than anti-Catholic legal hucksterism?
Well, I'm not an atheist, I'm a lawyer.
I'd quite like to get you to describe the distinction.
Well, I can see both sides. Now, what I will say to you is this. I don't agree, and Alan Dershowitz didn't agree when he agreed with me, that the Vatican is not a real state. It's a palace with gardens. It's as big as a golf course. And it's a real state in international law has to have a permanent population. There are no Vaticanians. There are a few dozen celibate priests. No one gets born in the Vatican except by unfortunate accident. So it's not a real state. And if the Pope is negligent, if the Vatican is negligent in moving a paedophile priest to another country, to fresh fields, to unsuspecting flocks, then of course he should be sued, or the Vatican, the Holy See, should be sued for negligence. So that's one way of making him accountable. I'm not actually anti-Catholic. I work a lot with Catholic groups against the death penalty. We'll be talking about that later, I guess. I greatly salute the work that Catholic organizations do in Africa, where I've been working. But that is, they are losing out because of the reaction. The Holy See will not act against child abuse. It continues to cover up. It continues to use canon law. And canon law has there's no cross-examination, there's no DNA testing, there is no punishment. What happens under canon law is that the guilty priest, who may have molested dozens of children, is asked to do penance, is asked to pray for the victims. Victims don't want prayers, they want justice, and they want to ensure that the molester doesn't do it again. I've been inspired by a priest from Dapto who had to go to the newspapers to tell on the paedophile ring that James Wood later investigated. And he said when he was ostracized and eventually committed suicide, but when he was asked, how can you rat on a brother? He said, no paedophile is a brother of mine. And that is the principle I would wish the Church to take on board. Mary MacKillop was excommunicated for dobbing in a priest.
I'm just going to interrupt you there, and I'm going to bring you back to the point that Paul Kelly made, because it does seem to me that you are the person in the world who's making the case that Pope should be made accountable for crimes against humanity, as you put it in your article in The Guardian. Do you believe the Pope should be indicted for those crimes or not?
No, I don't.
You're making slippery legal arguments
that
perhaps he should be, but you're not prepared to commit
Children's
to actually saying
Convention,
that.
he should be accountable, first of all, to the Children's Convention, which requires that in every state that those who commit crimes against children should be handed over to the police and should be dealt with, and that the interests of children should be put first. That, I believe, is international law, and that is the first law I want him held accountable to.
But you did raise the question of crimes against humanity very specifically. Do these breaches, widespread as they may be, amount to crimes against humanity?
The definition of a crime against humanity, and I don't want to get into legal problems, is that it should be widespread and systematic. And they are the words that have been used in Belgium, used in Ireland by judicial commissions. There is no question, I'm sorry, Paul, that crimes against humanity can be committed in peacetime as well as in war. In Kenya at the moment, we have the ICC investigating electoral violence. It's been voted on. Australia voted in favour of making crimes against humanity committed in peacetime. But I will tell you this, and this is the point of articulating a dangerous idea. Because it's a dangerous idea, people will act to avert the danger. And I have every confidence that the Pope, having come a long way in 4 months will come further and will change the law of the Vatican so as there will be zero tolerance and there will be mandatory reporting.
All right, Paul Kelly.
Look, there are two fundamental principles which should guide this debate, Tony. The first, which the Catholic Church has been in breach of for a long period of time, which it's now rectifying, is that Catholic priests guilty of child sexual abuse have got to be subject to the full force of the civil and criminal law. And the Church cannot try and dodge that reality. Now, that is the fundamental principle here. Now, as far as I understand the situation, I mean, certainly that applies in this country, it applies in Australia, it applies in the United States. We see priests being put on trial for these offences. So that is the first principle. The second principle is, in relation to the Church's internal affairs, the state has got to be very careful about intervening in the internal affairs and workings of the Church. That is, if you like, confusing the separation between church and state. Now, some people have been arguing for that. That is a false principle, provided that people, clergy, guilty of these offences are given the full force of the normal law, then there is no need for the state to intervene in the affairs of the Church. The final point is, I'm very interested that Geoffery said that he doesn't want to put the Pope in the dock. And I think that is an important point. But in relation to this, we need to be very careful of some of these arguments, because the argument has been mounted that there should be a threat to the Pope, and that the idea of threatening the Pope with international legal action will encourage reform in the Church. This is a complete illusion. This is a complete nonsense. I mean, essentially, there's been quite a lot of reform in the Church to this stage, and it misunderstands the activities and machinery of the Church on the one hand, and I think it's quite wrong to start running around threatening people with the force of international law simply to improve their behaviour.
Okay, I'm going to move on from this subject in just a moment, but I think Geoffery Robertson does deserve a quick response. A quick response to that.
Very quickly, tens of thousands of children have been raped by priests. The Church has covered up. The Church has trafficked. The Vatican has trafficked priests, as Paul accepts, from one country to another. That has to stop. The only way of stopping it is to point out, as I pointed out in my book, The Case of the Pope, that widespread and systematic child abuse is a crime if, under the command responsibility principle, if you've got the power to stop it and to punish the perpetrators, you've got a duty to do that.